All right, I think we should start. I just want to get the cue there from Nita on the online. Is the numbers coming in? All right, so I think we should start. We did indicate that we're going to start at 10 o'clock, but we're in a festive mode or mood, and therefore we would allow a couple of minutes late. So that's fine. I hope everybody had a cup of coffee already. So I'm Francis Peterson. I'm the Rector and Vice Chancellor of the University of the Free State, and it's indeed my pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 University of the Free State Thought Leadership Series. And this one is going to be the first time in 2022 that we're going to have it face-to-face and part of the festival. Now, I do believe that as a university and as an institution of higher learning, we need to participate in public discourse. We have got a lot of intellectuals within the university, but on the other side, we also have students in the university and in universities in South Africa that need to critically question things. They need to intellectually engage on certain topics. And it's often the topics of the day that is quite important. So we started this particular Thought Leadership series in 2018. And in fact, it is this very Free State Arts Festival that we started that Thought Leadership series in 2018. Now, we all know what happened subsequent to 2018 and 2019. We had the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, COVID hit, and COVID impacted the way in which we're doing in our offerings, doing our events, and we decided that the Thought Leadership series at that point will also move online, and that created a Thought Leadership webinar series that took place in 2020, 2021, and for the greatest part of 2022. So in 2022, this year, this particular one would be the fourth Thought Leadership, I probably should say, panel discussion, webinar discussion at the University of the Free State. And the idea of the Thought Leadership series is really to bring together, and I have to use the term quite sensitively, expert, because people would ask me, define the word expert. And I know everybody has got different definitions what an expert is about or what an expert should be. So I'm going to use the term expert/specialist in particular areas, depending on what the discussion is about, what the theme of the Thought Leadership series is about. So we bring together experts, specialists from around the country, but also from those that are available outside of South Africa. And then we also introduce some of our own thought leaders from academia. So we always will have on the panel somebody from the University of the Free State. And then the discussions is actually focusing on particular issues, as I indicated. It's also bring into play the audience. So there are opportunities that if there are questions that we would like to take from the floor in this particular setting today. But I also want to welcome at this point also our online participants. They would be able to define their questions in the chat box. And then Ms. Lasia Loader will have the opportunity to collate some of those. And then if there are particular questions that come through, ask those questions to our panelists, which I will introduce a little bit later. So what we had in 2020, we had themes, obviously, the theme should have been around COVID and the impact on COVID politically, socially, and economically. We had that discussion. We also had discussions that focused on reimagining universities in terms of student success, the role that universities are playing. And in that discussion, we had experts or specialists from the United States that pair up with some of our academics, and we had a debate and discussion around that. We focused on the on corruption in South Africa. I think something that I don't need to elaborate on, but hopefully some of you were party or participated or attended that particular webinar. And by the way, on corruption, we ran a competition for our final year students and all our postgraduate students across the university, starting towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, where we ask our final year students and our postgraduate students to through an essay, provided practical steps that we could curb corruption. Now, the focus of that was really to sensitize our students to the issue, sensitize our students to the values that we should exhibit in society, but also to see whether there are some critical thinking taking place, and that our students have the courage to challenge particular status quo. So that competition ended, and we had the prize winners about a month ago, and it's great to see how students also participate in offering solutions. So corruption was one. We had politics of local government, and that specifically as we move into the local government elections during last year, and then this year we focused on crime, which is a particular challenge for South Africa. We just heard about the German tourist in Mpumalanga, but also other crime that's happening in all parts of South Africa. And then very importantly, our recent webinar was on playing with words, but talking hopefully about the substance, is how do we power up South Africa? And we had, and I thought that the executive from Eskom would not accept to be part of the panel, but he did accept it, and we had a fantastic discussion around electricity and then obviously renewables. So you could see that it's really about topical issues, but very importantly is how do we go deeper and not only talking about these issues, but also hopefully constructively add to the solutions of these particular challenges. And at the end of these webinars, and also in the Thought Leadership series, I normally ask the panelists to give a message or two to our higher education institutions in South Africa. What should we be doing as academics, but more so as students? Because remember, we are preparing the next generation of leaders, of citizens that is going to be operating in society, and it's important that transformative intervention, that we have the opportunity to engage with our students while they're at the university, and leaders or intellectuals, political commentators, game changers, change makers in society. It's important also to hear what reflection they have in terms of what the university should be doing, and a debate for another thought leadership series would probably be how do we as university and as universities grapple with our engagement with society, because we have seen not only in South Africa but also not so much in South Africa but mainly in other parts of Europe, in the States, how anti-intellectualism, challenging the truth, and universities is about searching for the truth. If that is being challenged by leaders, then we need to ask the question, what is the role of universities in that context? But that's not for the discussion today, luckily not. So our discussion is themed around how I look into the future of South Africa. Now, it is about crystal balling in a sense, and engaging what's going to happen. But I think we have probably very, very good indicators, very good experiences of and reflections of what happened in South Africa up until now, and how do we take it forward. So uh, um, if you just look at from an unemployment perspective, we our unemployment rate is at an all-time high. It probably have come down a little bit, but it's still very high. Specifically, our unemployment amongst the youth, and how do we actually deal with that? The other part is that almost half of our population receives income from the state every month, and to what extent is there pressure on the fiscus to do all of the other things that we need to do, and to what extent do you create a level of entitlement, and if you ever had to take that away, what impact that would be for the country. There's an absence of policy systems with no leadership in our sort of making comments as an intro to our panel at the country at all levels. So there's a massive distrust that exists between government and communities. We talk about social compacts, but I think how do you grapple with that? Then there's the impact of economic growth and what needs to happen to be able to grow the economy. Not only from a pure investment perspective, but also the administration that has to execute these things to make sure that the economy is enabled to grow. And that's the massive issue around electricity. If you don't have electricity, then you can't grow the economy in a way. Nobody will invest if there isn't secure of supply from electricity. So it seems to me that there's a lot of challenges, preceded by the thought leadership series that we had up until now in the webinars, but also what's happening around our country today, which is visible to yourself. But I think this panel also have to, hopefully, they can see how they want to navigate through the questions that I will ask them. But they also have to probably say, what are the good things that has happened? So everything is not doom and gloom. We need to be able to say, well, we had the Zondo Commission that did a lot of work on corruption in state capture. We had a little bit of hiatus in the NPA, but which it seems to me that wheel is moving slowly. So there are good pockets of what's happening, and we need to also recognize that. But to what extent do we build on that? Now, for all of this, we have got an esteemed panel this morning that will engage on these issues, and their full curricular vitae and background sketches are on our website. I'm not going to read through all of them because then we're only going to have 10 minutes for the panel discussion. But and I'm gonna introduce it. I'm gonna call them up, and I think they could sit here starting from my immediate left. So our first panelist is Moletsi Mbeki. Often been seen Moletsi as a voice of reason in this whole sea of arguments and things that doesn't work. Moletsi is a deputy chairperson of the South African Institute of International Affairs, somebody that don't need any introduction. Moletsi, welcome, and if you can join me on the stage, thank you. Moletsi, you can just do that. 100%. Yeah, welcome.
I've since been promoted. I'm now chairman. So
oh, you're chairman. All right. So
you're looking for good news. You've got one already.
But hearty congratulations. And then our second panelist is from our own institution. She heads up the Department of Public Administration and Management in our Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences here at the University of the Free State. I asked her, is it Marieve? She said, no, it's Marieve Billion. It's a very soft R. You don't pronounce the R. Marieve, welcome, and join us here on the stage. can sit there in the middle. Thank you. Excellent. Welcome. And then our final panelist is Peter de Toy, also somebody that does not need any introduction. And Peter, I'm a little bit worried about censorship. I heard that there are some family members in the audience that are tasked to watch you and to listen to what you're going to say. If they heard everything before. Now, Peter is the assistant editor of In-Depth News at News 24, and I often like to listen to him on Bait Sake on Saturdays when you have that discussion. And it's great, your insights and your understanding of all of the issues. So these are our panelists. Welcome. There are mics. I just want to say you can just if you can just push the button upwards, and I just want to check with our system people if can all of our mics can be on at the same time. Okay, 100%. Well, that's a good. So welcome, and I want to kick off. I first thought that I'm going to give you about 5 to 10 minutes just to set the scene, but I'm probably going to try to jump in directly into the questions, and because it's such a wide topic, the outlook of what's the future for South Africa. It perhaps we need to get an understanding of the political issues, the economic issues, the social issues, the leadership issues that we might have in South Africa. But I'm going to start with you, Moletsi, in responding to the title of the focus, the outlook of South Africa. If you have to do a very brief reflection, what are the things that you think is going to be with us still going forward, and would be key challenges that we will have to grapple with? Otherwise we're not going to have a very wonderful future. We're probably going to have a bleak future.
Well, okay, thank you very much. I'm one of the optimists about South Africa. I remember, I think I was 5 or 6 years old. My father was the Eastern Cape editor of a newspaper called New Age, which was owned by the ANC and the Communist Party. This was in the early 50s. And I remember very vividly a cartoon of Straydom being stung by bees. This was the cartoon which my father was putting onto this magazine. Now, from then, I mean, this was, I don't know, many, many years ago, 70 years ago almost. And there was Straydom being stung by bees. Where is the National Party today? National Party is nowhere to be seen. So South Africa has made huge amount of progress from the days when we had Straydom being stung by bees. So for me, I think South Africa has a great future, but we have to realize great futures don't fall from heaven. You have to fight for them. And we all have to realize, especially for you guys who are students today, you have a huge fight in front of you to build a future for yourselves, to build a future for your children and for your grandchildren. And these are, they have to be fought for. Previous generations fought for a better South Africa. We do have a better South Africa than we had 100 years ago. We have one of the largest railway networks in the world, notwithstanding the failure of Transnet to look after it. It is still there. So I can go on and on. I lived in several African countries. I lived in Lesotho. I went to high school in Lesotho. I lived in in Tanzania, I lived in Zambia, I lived in Zimbabwe. When I compare those countries to South Africa, I remember once talking to a Tanzanian, and their agriculture, the main agricultural implement that they were using was the hoe. So I said to the Tanzanians, but in Southern Africa, South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, nobody uses the hoe except maybe for weeding. All the plowing is done either with a tractor, of course, if you're a commercial farmer, or for small-scale farmers with an ox-drawn plow. So it just shows you where South Africa is in the world today. So for me, I'm very optimistic about South Africa. And as I say, I think we have to realize, the student generation has to realize you have to fight for a better South Africa. And it's not for a better South Africa, it's for your own better life. Get away from the notion that you are saving anyone. You're not saving anyone. You're fighting for your own children and for your own life and for your own parents, so that in their old age they are properly looked after. So yes, I have to appeal to the students that I grew up as a student. I used to go to demonstrations against the Americans in their war in Vietnam. I used to demonstrate against Pinochet in Chile, against Ian Smith in Rhodesia, as well as, of course, Verwoerd in South Africa. So I hope you are also doing the same, demonstrating against the bad guys, not just in South Africa, but in many other parts of the world, because many other people in the world supported South Africa to get us where we are. We have to support them today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Molechi. Peter, I want to come to you. We've heard now from Molechi that he's very optimistic. What's your views?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I think that can keep us busy for very long. Look, objectively, I think Molechi is right. We've got a lot going for us in this country. There are very few countries in the world with the natural resources that we have, that has the amount of human capital that we have. We're a modernizing country on the continent, so the continent looks towards us to help it. We are a significant player on the global stage, or until recently we used to be, certainly in multilateral fora, where Molechi is obviously very involved in at the Institute for International Affairs. So there's a lot going for us. And after 1994, certainly for around 20 years, we were very much the flavor of the month everywhere. We punched above our weight. We were invited to the G7 meetings, G20 meetings. We at one stage, or more than one, we've held the chairmanship of the Security Council as part of the non-permanent members. So we're a much different country than we were in 1994. And if you think of the last 30 years and history, you should always, when you consider our country's part or position where we are now in the long sweep of history, we should be beware of looking at our country as a snapshot of where we are now. We should consider it as a continuum of history. And if you look at where we were 30 years ago, I mean, in 1993, when Chris Hani was murdered, we were on the precipice of a bloody revolution. That's where we were. People forget that. We talk about high inflation now, high interest rates. I mean, in 1998, I think the interest rate was 25%. So we are much better off than we were 30 years ago. But I do think we have to acknowledge that where we are now, the country's in a dire state. When a government and when a state starts to struggle to provide basic services, then we have to ask hard questions of the state of governance, of government, and of our leadership. Yesterday in Johannesburg, where I live, we are now starting to deal with water shedding. Increasingly, that's becoming a problem. Not only are we dealing with load shedding electricity, water is becoming scarce. You referenced the German tourist that was murdered the other day. Now, that was a front page story in Germany, and obviously I work for News 24, and it was a big story for us as well. But crime in this country is a massive issue. It's not only German tourists that are killed, but South Africans are suffering from the effects of rampant crime. Now, you had the Minister of Police yesterday rushing to the scene, but what have they been doing over the last 4, 5, 6 years to curb crime? Is Bheki Cele the right guy to be the Minister of Police? No, he's patently not. Our President, during the worst of the electricity crisis over the last week, opted to go and speak to a conference of the SA Democratic Teachers Union rather than deal with the electricity crisis, which is affecting everyone. The economy is losing billions of rands every single day in the face of ineffectual political leadership. So when you talk about the country's future, you have to, like I said earlier, judge it in the long sweep of history. So, we might be in a dark place now. It might be better tomorrow. It might be better next week or next month. But Moletsi is right. We have to fight for it, and we have to call out our leaders, and we have to hold them accountable. You mentioned the state capture inquiry. That's going to be a massive test for this president. The state capture inquiry revealed the depth and the breadth of not only corruption but mismanagement and the collapse of good governance over the last decade and more. Now, that needs to be turned around, and it can only be turned around with determined and urgent leadership. And we're not seeing that at the moment. So I'm fearful that we will squander all the advantages that we have as a nation and as a country, which I mentioned earlier. If we don't hold our leaders to account, if they don't follow the idea of civic-mindedness and civic duty, and what I mean by that is if they don't believe in that political power is there to improve the lives of South Africans, then we will be on this slow boat to nowhere, and that's the last thing anyone here wants. We've got enormous advantages in this country. We've got enormous resources in this country, but I fear that we are squandering it. We're squandering it because of poor leadership, because of a governing party that I think has pretty much given up on governing on behalf of the citizenry. And 2024, the next general election, is going to be an enormous test for our system of governance, for government, for politics, because I think people are losing faith in politicians. You can see it in the statistics when you look at election statistics over the last couple of election cycles. Increasingly, people aren't going to vote. They're retreating from the political space. That creates space for parties on the fringes to dictate political affairs. We saw what happened in Johannesburg over the last week where a coalition collapsed. It collapsed because a small party, the EFF, which is stuck on 10% nationally, was starting to call the shots. Now that's a dangerous territory, I would think. So I think we've got a lot going for us. I don't think we're using the resources properly. I think we've got an inefficient government. We're seeing it every single day. I think infrastructure is now starting to take strain and collapse, like we're seeing with Eskom. So there's a lot that I'm concerned about. But just as an opening salvo, there are good things happening as well. You mentioned the National Prosecuting Authority. Now, it was as a working journalist who was involved in covering state capture and dealing with those crooks under Jacob Zuma's government, to see people like Brian Molefe, Anosh Singh, and a number of others in the dock was a good day. It means the system is starting to recover. We've got fantastic leadership at the National Prosecuting Authority, individuals who believe in the rule of law and who believe in the Constitution, and who are trying their damnedest to exact accountability from these individuals. So that's a good thing. There's strong leadership at Eskom, despite what people may believe. But you've got a team of people there who now understand the depth of the problem and are trying to fix what they can. And contrary to what people are saying, they don't want Andre de Ruyter out because power stations aren't working. It's because he's closed the taps of extraction. I mean, those networks that were operating in Eskom, literally carting out billions of rands over the period of 10 years, those taps are now being closed. So that's why he's under pressure, not about electricity. And the other thing is, at the Joburg mining in Durban the last couple of days, the big mining houses aren't divesting from this country. They are investing in the country. So there's still a hell of a lot of money to be made in the private sector, and the private sector realizes that. So we've got a lot going for us. I mean, you're the head of a university, a significant player in civil society. We've got a very strong civil society. We've got strong civic organizations, civil organizations, churches, academia, the business environment. I mean, we've got a free press. I can say whatever I want and write whatever I want, even though I might offend everyone, but I'm still allowed to say it. I won't go to jail. So there's a lot of positives, but like Moletsi said, we need to fight for the future, and we need to be honest about what's wrong now. And I would argue the biggest problem that we've got is a corrupted governing party and a lack of strong leadership and urgent leadership.
Okay. I'll come back in my second round to drill a little bit more deeper in some of the issues that both you and Moletsi have raised. But thanks, Peter. Maeve, what is your view? Because your specialization is more local government. And local government is really where the rubber hits the road, in a way. And I'm going to make a statement to say that most of our local governments are dysfunctional, in a way. So the services that is needed to provide it to the people is not necessarily there and is not forthcoming. But in contextualizing the sort of a reflection up until now and how that will influence the future, what is your views? Don't you have isn't there one next to you? No. Okay. Well, you're going to share that now, right?
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes, thank you, Prof, for that question. And the local government in South Africa has become, I think, our problem child. But I also want to start by putting things into context in terms of where we've come from. And as the two previous speakers have also reflected on the fact that there's a lot of good that has happened over the past decades. And I think what our local government and also government in general has achieved in terms of redressing imbalances in terms of service delivery. But I think we have hit a ceiling where, as you have now mentioned, that some of our municipalities have become dysfunctional. And you are not incorrect by stating that. I think there's been research done where it has stated that, and where it has been captured that a very small percentage of municipalities are in fact actually functional. And I think that's one of our greatest challenges at the moment in terms of if we're looking towards the future and how do we keep our country sustainable, because service delivery and the functioning of our local government, as you said, that it's where what government wants to do for our citizens and how do we keep our country afloat. Service delivery impacts economic growth and development as well. It's not just merely about delivering services to communities, but it's also about how do those services impact the lives of communities. And as Peter has stated, that our political leaders, are they realizing that the way in which we are delivering services should come from the perspective of Batopele, we are putting the people first. It should also come from a perspective of, are we still delivering services with the notion of being people-centered? It's about what the people want, and it's aligned to what the needs of the communities are. So yes, we have 257 municipalities in the country, and the AG reports actually awakens us every year when that report comes out about the challenges in the South African local government sphere. And it's not only related to service delivery. You talked about the fact that a lot of our households are dependent on social grants. With the COVID-19, the introduction of the assistance through the social grant, we now have households who are reliant as their primary source of income. And that also has implications for municipalities, because those communities or households become part of the indigent population in the municipalities. And the municipality cannot say, I'm not going to deliver services to those community members or households who are not contributing to the revenue or the tax base of a municipality. No, they are legally obliged still to deliver services. So issues of poverty in our country as well, it impacts our households. All of these issues filters over into our municipalities. And yes, the current status quo doesn't look very optimistic, but I think we have to be optimistic about it. And as Peter has also reflected, in some of these municipalities, we do have good political leadership. We do have good administrative leadership. But there's really a need to look at how are we going to tackle the challenge currently in the South African local government landscape. I think we must also realize that the responsibilities of municipalities have changed since our democratic dispensation. They are no longer just responsible for your basic services, your water, your roads, infrastructure, maintaining traffic lights and traffic regulations in municipalities. All of the challenges in terms of unemployment, how do they ensure that the services that they are providing actually contributes to providing a conducive economic environment for business growth, to attract investment to areas, to retain businesses in areas. The issues, social issues as well, they now have to also look at and consider as well. If you think about the COVID-19 pandemic and what transpired and how municipalities were also expected to respond to that. And are their systems resilient and agile enough, like our other spheres of government as well? I think that's a question for them as well. Are our systems, our governance systems, agile and resilient enough to withstand all of the challenges that we are experiencing currently, not only in South Africa, but also globally? The impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on us, it doesn't stay there. It comes back to the country and to our doorstep as well. And then, of course, apart from our service delivery challenges, I think if we look into the future as well, especially concerning the state of local government and its governance in the country, the financial health and viability and sustainability of municipalities. That's one of the recurring challenges that comes out also in the Auditor General report on an annual basis. Issues of corruption. If we look at the statistics, then South Africa is ranked amongst the 70 countries who are the most corrupt in the world in terms of Transparency International. And what is it that we are doing to curb maladministration, corruption, and where these type of corrupt activities are actually infiltrating our systems, and how are our governance systems, so your political leaders, those who are in leadership in terms of management, what are they doing in terms of ensuring that there's compliance with the vast legislative framework that's in place for our municipality? How do we deal with consequence management as well as accountability? And then, of course, the issue of leadership. I think we can agree that, yes, there's leadership, but do we have the right type of leadership? We need ethical leadership. At this stage, I think, not leadership that is dysfunctional and leadership that is actually not doing anything about the challenges that communities are experiencing and all of the wrongdoings that's actually occurring within the municipalities.
Thank you, Maeve. I think to a certain extent, the first round have given us a sense of where we are and how that would influence our thinking in terms of the future of South Africa. But I want to, in the second round, drill down a little bit deeper in some of the issues. But I also just wanted to say to the audience here in the venue, as well as our audience online, that there will be an opportunity for you also to ask questions. So if you have a question that you think you would like to ask, maybe you should just jot it down in the meantime. Moletsi, I want to come back to you. Now that we have a sense of optimism, but also an indication how all of these political, economic, social issues are in fact interrelated. Maeve have given a very good example. But I want to start off with the political challenge. We're going into the ANC Leadership Conference the end of the year. What is your views? What should happen to be able to make you more optimistic from a political leadership perspective in December in the ruling party? And maybe your comments, which I want to pick up, that the one point that Peter have mentioned about coalition politics. Maybe just a comment or two on that as well.
Oh, wow. Well, the one thing I'm not optimistic about is the future of the ANC. I think the people of South Africa had a lot of confidence in the ANC. If you actually look at the voting for the ANC from 1994 up to the last election, in 1994, I think the ANC got 62% of the vote. I think in 2002, it was nearly, in 2004, it was nearly 70% of the vote.
Can I interrupt and say, in that year, when there was a president called Thabo Mbeki, it was 69.69% of support.
So there's no relation.
So the people had a lot of hope about what and they delivered the vote. In the last election, in the local government election, the ANC vote, the national part of it, was 45%, if I'm not mistaken. So from 69.9 to 45%, that's a massive drop. So it shows, so my own view is, I think the ANC is following the path of all liberation nationalist parties in Africa. We forget that the National Party itself was a liberation party. At some stage, it had its grievances against the British. So it was part of the African liberation parties. Where are these liberation parties today? The National Party is gone. Kaunda's party, the UNIP, is gone. Nkrumah's party is gone. Kenyatta's party is gone, and so on. So I don't expect the ANC has much time left. I think the way it is performing, the message is clear to the voters in South Africa. How can you be faced with the problem of electricity and you have 15 years to solve it, and it is worse than it was when it started? You just don't know what to do. That is the message. So in terms of the future of the ANC, I don't think the ANC has a future any more than the other parties that I have listed have a future. Now, so obviously, we have a whole number of small parties in South Africa. We don't have a big party that on its own can replace the ANC. But what I'm encouraged about the opposition parties is that they realize they have to learn about coalitions. Last week, I think it was last week, we had 8 parties, interestingly, including the ANC, which spent 4 days in Denmark learning about coalitions. And Peter, you were involved in some of these learning processes. I don't know what you are learning, but anyway, at least you're learning something. So the opposition parties are realizing that they have to learn about coalitions. We've seen the collapse of the coalition in Johannesburg a few days ago. Of course, coalitions do collapse. So we have to be realistic about that. But I think the fact that they realize they have to learn, I think, in fact, if I heard somewhere that there's a conference that the Nelson Mandela Foundation is organizing for the political parties on again on issues of coalitions. So I think for the ANC, we have to realize the ANC is going the way of all parties like the ANC in Africa, and I don't think anything can save it. So what other new parties should be coming up in South Africa? What sort of parties should come up? A few weeks ago, I was invited to speak to the Pietermaritzburg Chamber of Commerce. Now these are very wealthy business people. So they were complaining about everything under the sun, like the long list of deficiencies that you have. So I said to them, you know, what we need in South Africa is for the rich to set up their own political party. Instead of expecting somebody to save them and to sort out municipal problems for them, they should sort them out themselves. And we're a democracy. In a democracy, that's how things are done. If you are unhappy about something, you take political action. That's what the Constitution, that's why we have a Constitution. You take political action and you sort out the problems. I got a very big banner headline in the newspapers. Mwelese calls for the rich to set up their own party. Well, I'm still calling on the rich to set up their own party. The reality is that the rich control a lot of the resources of the country. They control a lot of the skills of the country. So instead of sitting back and thinking somebody will solve the problem that is a political problem, well, they have to jump in like the rest of us and try and make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue, Peter, into my question to you. By the way, there was a good party by Patricia de Lille, so there could have been a rich party as well, you know, good and rich party. I want to move to the economic part, because if you have economic growth and you create jobs, people start to work, their self-confidence pick up, you deal with the issues of poverty, inequality, and I think it's just a wheel that starts to develop just much more motion. What is your views on how we're going to get it right, besides the political leadership that we talked about? Are there other levers? And I did recognize the interrelationship, obviously. But from your perspective, how are we going to get it right? Specifically also now the comment that you made about the mining in Indaba that took place, the Johannesburg mining in Indaba that took place a few days ago.
Francis, I first just want to revisit my previous answer to you, perhaps, and I've been thinking about it now that, you know, just before we went on stage, amongst ourselves, we spoke and said, look, we have to be honest as well, because otherwise we're going to lose credibility. And I might be less optimistic about the future than I was a year ago or 5 years ago. Because what in my day job and I lead our investigations team at News 24, we've got a big newsroom with big offices in Cape Town and in Johannesburg. We've got reporters across the country. We've got a big political team. We've got reporters covering the Metro of Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town. We've got people in the courts. You know, and unfortunately what we're seeing day after day, and in my day job as head of investigations, is that corruption remains extraordinarily rampant in local municipalities, in national government, at every level of government. We are seeing extraordinary inefficiencies in delivering basic services. And we aren't seeing, and Mweletse spoke about political leadership, and I think that's a whole thought leadership series on itself, and we aren't seeing urgency of leadership to sort out these very serious problems that we've got. I mean, our problems that we have, and you referenced the economy now, it's not unknown. It's staring us in the face. We face it every single day, as do the solutions to those problems. Now, the National Treasury every single year publishes a fantastic document called the Budget Review, and I'd urge everyone to go and read it when the budget documents are published. It sets out exactly what the state of our national finances are. It sets out exactly what the state of the national economy is, about what the problems are. It explains what guidance it gives to the cabinet in terms of reforms that are needed, and it also gives projections about where the country will be in 3, 4, 5, 10 years' time if those reforms aren't enacted. Now, some of these warning signs have been published by National Treasury for 10 years. And this government has not done a single thing about looking at the structure of the economy. Now, our economy still maintains the characteristics of the siege economy that we had under apartheid. Not enough has been done to make sure that the economy is more inclusive. But the problem that the economy, of course, has, and you sit atop an academic institution, we aren't producing enough skills. We aren't producing enough qualified people to staff the positions in the economy that we need to drive us forward, to propel us forward. So there's a myriad of problems that simply aren't being addressed. National Treasury publishes a guideline every year for government to say, look, Mr. President and Minister of Finance, you have to do points 1 to 10. Otherwise, we're going to be otherwise, our debt to GDP ratio is going to skyrocket over the next 10 years. And that's exactly what happened. You know, in 2007, at Polokwane, when the ANC took its dark turn, the economy was growing at something like 5%. Unemployment was sitting at 26%, which is still very high, but which was incrementally going down. What's happened since 2007? You know, we're in a worse position than we are in many respects since 1994. Ishmael Momoniat is the acting Director General at National Treasury. He is on record as saying that many indicators, and we can list them, debt to GDP ratio, unemployment, access to many services, are worse than in 1994. Now that comes from the Director General at National Treasury. That's an act in itself to try and destroy what it can, to steal as much as it can, and to look only after itself. I would also argue that the ANC now has pretty much given up on governance. It's only focused on its own internal wranglings. It's only focused on its own internecine battles and squabbles. I mean, the president is not focused on sorting out the biggest crisis that we have, and that's access to, that's the provision of reliable electricity. But the economy is our single biggest problem. Unemployment is a powder keg that's waiting to explode. You cannot have, on the broader definition of unemployment, 44% of South Africans unemployed. I mean, it's simply unsustainable. We're all seeing increased poverty around us every single day. What's government doing to address that in concert with the private sector? There still seems to be a reluctance to pull in the private sector, to make them full partners and to try and generate economic growth, to try and generate employment. And that must be a source of huge frustration for academia, because you guys are supposed to produce the next generation of leaders and qualified artisans and business people and accountants and lawyers, but we're simply not producing enough of them. So we're in a bad spot, and I'm very concerned for our future, and I'm concerned that if we don't address our economic issues, which should be front and center of every single newspaper every single day, then in 5 years' time, we might not sit on this stage. We might lament what could have been and what should have been. But 5 years ago, we had exactly the same problems. What changed in those 5 years? Not a heck of a lot. In fact, a small economy like ours, part of an interconnected world, is much more susceptible to exogenous shocks, like what's happening in Europe now. That means we have to work so much harder to make sure that we do the right things. Our investment grade status. Look, that up until shortly before the pandemic hit, that was this government's biggest issue, that and wage negotiation. Then the pandemic hit, which no one could predict, and our investment grade status at the last, which was held by the single last ratings agency that still had us at semi-investment grade, we lost that as well. So, there were a number of own goals over the last decade, which really has set us back. So the economy is in dire shape. But, just to emphasize again, there's still, for the big companies, the big multinationals, the big mining companies, they still see opportunity in the country. They still see that there's a lot of money to be made for them and their shareholders, which means we've still got enough resources, human resources, and things going for us. But I fear that we might lose that advantage if we don't act and act with urgency.
And I think that point is a very critical point. Now, I wasn't at the mining in Durban, but what often mining companies would be looking for in terms of investment is more certainty.
Yes.
Certainty in legislation, certainty in electricity supply, and mining investments are long-term investments.
Yeah.
If you change legislation every second year, no investor is going to come.
And Francis, that's interesting you should say that, because Neil Froneman, who is the CEO of Sibanye Stillwater, the world's biggest platinum producer, said, you know, contrary, and he's very outspoken. He's one of those classic gruff mining types. You know, he doesn't take. No, you know, he's a miner, you know, so he's rough around the edges. He says, look, it's still a better location to come and mine in South Africa than many other African countries. So we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves as well. You know, if for them to invest billions of dollars in the country means that something's working for them. But what they're doing now as well is they are starting to build their own power stations, because the state cannot ensure reliable electricity. So Anglo American is now building a power plant of 6 gigawatt. That's 3 Koebergs to supply their mines, and the rest they'll sell into the grid. So there's a lot of, I mean, these companies still believe in the country, and now they're taking themselves off the grid, much like many South Africans are, you know, taking yourself off the grid.
And which is good, because I think that is what came out of our last thought leadership series. Eskom clearly said that we need to support renewables, and a lot of that has to come outside of Eskom. So I know that Anglo American also recently, I don't know whether they signed it already, but with a French company, with Total, also on renewables, and that is fantastic, because if you start to use to generate that type of supply, it actually lower the demand on Eskom, and they can then start to do what they're supposed to do. Marie-Eve, and then after Marie-Eve's response, I'm going to come to the audience for a particular question. Peter mentioned about academia and skills, and that is also a debate on its own. But I want to indicate that from our university specifically, and I also know about a lot of other universities that has been engaging with local government and provincial government to say that we've got expertise in financial management, financial planning, in try to identify where you can water reticulation, water distribution. But there seems to be a reluctance of local governments to pick that up in a way. So I want, there's actually 2 questions. The one is I want you to comment on that. Why is that the case? And then secondly, we've now looked at the political leadership, the economic growth. What is the role of civil society? And Peter mentioned earlier that we've got a very strong civil society component in South Africa. But not only to say, if the political leadership is not providing us, then we're going to go down. What should we be doing as ordinary citizens at a local level to be able to contribute to a better future?
I think that we as voters should remember that your responsibility. Yeah. Sorry, I'm a bit soft-spoken. So we must remember that our responsibility as a voter doesn't stop after you've casted your ballot. We still have responsibility to keep the councillors and the politicians and the political parties that we voted for, to keep them accountable once they assume office. And I think sometimes we as the electorate, we forget about that. But as Peter has mentioned, what we've also seen, so I'm starting with a question about the role of civil society or the role of society in terms of keeping our government in general accountable, but also at a local government level, what is it that we as communities and civil society can do? So if we talk also about the community, it's us as the university, as knowledge partners, it's the private sector, it's businesses, it's your civil society organizations, your NGOs and your NPOs who also sometimes deliver services on behalf of municipalities, but also those private contractors who submit a tender, who receives the tender and then delivers a service. So our role of society or as community members and as voters, remember people fought for that right so that all of us can vote as South Africans, is to keep our political leadership accountable, to keep our administrative leaders and our municipalities accountable in terms of their role, in terms of their legislative mandate, and to keep on reminding them of what it is that they are there for, in terms of the positions that they are holding. And those are positions as public servants. And I think to a certain extent, the type of perhaps political leaders or administrative leaders that we are currently seeing in our public sector have forgotten that their role is that of a public servant to our communities. But what we have also seen in terms of how communities and civil society are keeping, if I just talk about the municipalities, keeping them accountable, we have seen an increase in terms of communities becoming more organized, in terms of whether they submit a complaint with the public protector. There's a case in the Eastern Cape, a municipality where the community actually took the municipality to court because the municipality simply didn't deliver the basic service that they are responsible for. And we have all of these rights, and it's your right to organize yourself and to either pursue a case, a formal court case, or use our Chapter 9 institutions. I know some communities also complain at the Human Rights Commissions, and we also have some of our opposition parties who are taking our governing party to task by complaining at some of these Chapter 9 institutions. And that is actually very good in terms of seeing that the democracy is being challenged. It's a good thing to see that communities and citizens, or whether if they are organized or whether they are doing it in their private capacity, they are not just sitting back and accepting everything as it is. Yes, a lot has been done, perhaps in terms of where we have been and the developments that has occurred, but when things are not right, we need to speak up and we need to keep our government and our municipalities accountable. I guess the challenge becomes when communities start taking responsibility for delivering services that they are in any case paying for. A typical example, some live in either a security complex or in your neighborhood, and your refuse is not collected, but you pay for that. And then your neighborhood or the rest of your neighbors, you decide you're going to get a private contractor now to come and collect the refuse. But still, you are paying as that service fee to the municipalities. So where are we blurring the lines in terms of what is the responsibility of communities and civil society in terms of either accepting responsibility now for delivering services that municipalities are supposed to do or to deliver, and they continue to pay for those particular services. But there's definitely a role for civil society to play in terms of addressing and finding sustainable solutions to a lot of these challenges that municipalities are experiencing. But now, coming back to your first questions, are our political leadership and our administrative leadership in these municipalities, are they willing and open to receive such assistance? Are they willing to co-produce and co-create services with communities? And not only limit the role and the involvement of communities to planning for the integrated development planning process, but are they willing to engage in conversations and to listen to academics who are providing evidence for informed policy making? Are they willing to take up the resources and the skills and the expertise of retired individuals in communities who want to assist not only for improving their own lives, but also the rest of the communities. So to answer you in terms of why is it that your councillors or your officials in a management position sometimes in municipalities are not listening and taking up the opportunity for engaging with civil society and to look at partnerships and collaborations, because that's going to be the future. And COVID-19 taught us. When we saw communities taking ownership and initiative in terms of starting social relief projects, some people lost their businesses, and they looked at new opportunities. But all of that took place within the framework of partnerships and collaborations. Coming back to your questions, why is it happening? I'm not particularly sure. Perhaps it is that they don't want, they feel that it's their mandate. But I think there definitely needs to be a paradigm shift. And if municipalities want to see change, and if we want a better future, a sustainable future for the country as well as our municipalities and communities, they will have to start considering the role of society in terms of what it is that they are doing and how they are executing their mandate.
Thank you very much, Maeve. So let's go to get some questions from the audience. There are some roaming mics, so if you can just indicate by a show of hands, then I'll direct the mic to you. See, there's a question, or there's a whole series of questions, it seems to me, but yeah, I think you probably will have to, the mic's closed, there's about two questions at the back there. 2 or 3 questions, and then there's a cluster of questions in the middle. But let's start here. We'll take about 4 or 5 questions. And if you want a specific panelist to answer the question, just indicate that when you ask it.
Oh, my question is for everyone. Given the...
Your mic on?
Yes.
Okay, just try again.
Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry.
Your voice a bit.
I'm soft-spoken as well, so apologies. Given the current state of South Africa and where we are post-COVID and the challenges that we're facing with unemployment, inequality, poverty, my question is, do we really need the state? Some might even ask, what power or what influence should the state have given its incompetence and corruption? That is my question.
Is that to which panelist?
Anyone can answer.
But I'm going to take about 4 or 5 questions. The second question.
Thank you very much. My name is Leseja. My question is, let me start by saying, Chairperson, allow me to be a bearer of good news that the Constitutional Court declared the deployment policy unconstitutional. So I'm someone who believes that local government is the cornerstone of democracy. And secondly is that we need to have leaders in local government who possess the necessary skill. Now, my question is related to the decision of the Constitutional Court today, and to all of you, anyone can answer that. What is the next step? Because is this going to work as it is, since we have the leading party, the ruling party, and things like that? Thank you very much.
Right. Can you just articulate that decision again of the Constitutional Court, so that everybody's clear?
The decision of the Constitutional Court is that the deployment policy, cadre deployment policy, was declared unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm. Peter, that might be a question that you should answer.
Let's see if I can get the judgment.
Yeah. Let's go to the third question.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Chair. My name is Kutso Mnisi. Also, as a former student leader, I welcome the threat of the ANC. In South Africa, I think we've had enough, and I agree with what Mr. Mbeki said there, that the threat of the ANC is a matter of eventuality, and we might see it after the December conference. My question is directed to you, Mr. Mbeki. We have over 600 political parties in South Africa registered with the IEC. My question is quite long, but I wrote it down. Is this really a sign of a maturing or matured democracy, or a further fragmentation of the power of the dejected or rejected majority? Or do we need an agent electoral reform? Thank you.
Thank you. I visited Lesotho the other day, and I think they got 48 different political parties in Lesotho. All right, so let's, if we can just move, the mic is there at the back.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Kananelo, and my question goes to Mr. Mweleti as well. So, one of the political analysts that I well respect, Mr. Prince Mashile, made a pronouncement that South Africa is a failed state. So I just want to hear from you if you think it's a failed state. He thinks it's a failed state because all four important things in the country have fallen. Our education system is not working. Health sector cannot provide good health care to our people. We have an energy crisis. Our security as a country, we know that SANDF is always, its budget is always getting cut. And also, Mr. Ralph Mateja also said, we live in a country where majority of the middle class, they are basically homeless. They don't own any homes, they are renting. So I just want to hear from you. Do you think South Africa is a failed state, or are we heading there, or is there a room from which we can caution that from happening? Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. We can take, is there another question there? There's one over there.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Vusi. My question is to all the panelists. I wanted to ask what can be done to ensure that there's a proper continuity of service delivery in local municipality during the change of leadership, be it in the coalition government, when there is maybe a new mayor that is coming in or out. What can be done to make sure that there's a continuity of service delivery, be it in infrastructure or any other forms? Thanks.
Thank you. I think, Eve, you can also comment on that, but I think that's a great. Let's take a last question, and then I just want to check with Lascia. Lascia, are there also questions on the online? No, nothing. Okay. So let's take a last question. We can do another round.
All right. My name is Lolo Motsamai from African Women in Energy and Power. My first comment really is to Ntate Mweleti Mbeki to say that, you know, as sad as it stands is on the future of the ANC, but the reality is the writings have been on the wall for a long time, and I speak as the former treasurer of the ANC Youth League back in my young days. So it really is sad, but however, as I say, the writings are on the wall, and I think it's time for change. To the local government issue, I think local government remains a very contentious issue, and you know, just bringing it close to home in the Free State with what's happening with Mangaung Metro Municipality. I mean, as I understand, the first municipality to have been placed under administration. In addition to that, not only is the municipality defunct, but we also have the distribution utility in Sentlek, which is, geez, I can't even think of a word at this stage to say what's happening in Sentlek. I mean, we've also been hearing in the local news in terms of the board being dissolved but we speak of economic growth and challenges, at the core of economic growth really is, how do we speak about economic growth with no energy security? And I just want to hear from you, given the state of things in Mangaung specifically, with the defunct municipality, defunct distribution utility, where do you see us? And as a business person, or other business people, how is one really supposed to feel about the current state of things in Mangaung? And just thought, when we think things couldn't get any worse, we see now in the arts and culture fraternity, there's the Makufe saga now that's carrying on. I mean, if the ship is not sinking in the Free State, I don't know. And I must say, one is very despondent at this stage. I hear Mr. Moleki Mbeki talks about how optimistic it is. But if you are from the Free State, specifically Bloemfontein, really it's quite discouraging. It's quite sad given the current state of things in our province.
Right. Well, let's see your views. And there's obviously a couple of questions, and I'll go through to the panel in whatever you want to respond to. Well, let's see.
I remember a couple of questions were directed to me. The question of South Africa being a failed state, I don't agree with that. I think what we have in South Africa is a failed government. And many people, or many so-called analysts, and I'm one of them, mistake government and the state. They confuse the two or think that the state is the same as the government. We have a failed government in South Africa, it's very clear. The crisis of Eskom, which is a good illustration of this. I remember the blackouts starting in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. 15 years later, the government has failed to sort out the problem of electricity supply. Now, there's nothing mysterious about supplying electricity. What has not been happening is that the government policies has failed. And it looks like the country is failing, but actually what has failed is the government, which owns the main electricity supply company. So people are afraid of talking about the ANC. Some of them want contracts from the ANC. So they're afraid of speaking directly to what is going on. Like here, I was secretary of ANC students in the United Kingdom, youth and students in the 70s. So that's where I come from. But I have to admit that the ANC, if after 15 years you are unable to solve a problem of electricity supply, you have failed. Not the country, you, the government. So we have a problem of a failed government in South Africa. But being a democracy, failed governments are voted out. You saw what happened in the United States last year, I think. A failed government of Trump, which failed to address the issue of COVID-19, was voted out by the American voters and was replaced by a government that prioritized what you do, how to handle the problem of COVID-19. So we in South Africa have to start to learn that we vote out governments that fail. There is nothing wrong with that. I know Jacob Zuma said that the ANC will be there until the second coming of Jesus. Well, maybe, but actually somebody pointed out that Jesus has already been. so the ANC should go. So I don't agree South Africa is a failed state. We have a failed government. That part. The question of 600 political parties. to me, it's not a sign of a maturing democracy. It's a sign of a new democracy. So the fact that we have 600 political parties is a good sign that we are a new democracy, and the people with a potential for political leadership, or the political entrepreneurs, if you want to put it that way, are busy and they are active and they're trying to make a difference. So I'm happy South Africa has 600 registered political parties, but it's not a sign of a mature democracy. It's a sign of a new democracy. A mature democracy represents combinations of interests, which clusters of interests. And 2 or 3 parties are normal in a mature democracy to represent interests that cluster together. And in South Africa, we're not there yet. So our democratic process is still in the process of finding its way. If I can give you an example. In 2011, COSATU undertook a survey of their own shop stewards, what their political views are, and what political future they would like to see, and so on. And this was a professional survey which was funded, which was run by an independent analyst, market research company. The survey showed that 96% of COSATU members voted for the ANC. But the study also showed that I think it was 67% of COSATU members wanted COSATU to set up a Labour Party. Now, COSATU leadership decided against setting up a Labour Party and continued with this alliance with the ANC. Now you are seeing that 10 years later, the opinion of the members, which the leadership chose to ignore, is now catching up with the leadership of COSATU, where the leaders of COSATU are now embarrassing the president of the ANC and the chairman of the ANC. They keep inviting the president, and the workers shout him down. They invite and now he can't go, so he sends a representative, and the workers shout him down. So you can see what is starting to happen in South Africa just by observing COSATU. You can see that the working class in South Africa realizes that the middle class, which is who has been leading the politics of resistance and ruling South Africa since '94, that the middle class no longer represents the interests of the working class. So the workers are shouting down the leaders of the ANC, and it's very clear to that the survey, what the survey showed in 2011 was that the workers want a more social democratic type of a party, rather than a nationalist party, which is what the ANC is. So the change may be taking a long time, but it's starting to happen. So yes, I don't think we should. I agree about what you raised about electoral reform. The ANC has been resisting the introduction of constituencies. And you see it in the current discussions about electoral reforms. One of the ironies, we South Africans love, governments love having commissions. But one of the interesting things is that when it comes to electoral reforms, the ANC government always accepts minority reports. But you are supposed to accept majority report. But it accepts minority report. There was a report which was chaired by the latest Van Zyl Slabbert, which recommended constituencies. The ANC was against it accepted a minority report from the Slabbert Commission. There is another one which was chaired by Vali Musa, a committee commissioned by the Minister of Home Affairs. He accepted a minority report again when the majority said the issue of constituencies, that constituencies should be introduced. Nobody's saying you should abolish the proportional representation, but we need to combine it with proper constituency system.
There was one question on Mangaung. Do you want to comment on that?
I thought that was for her.
Marieve?
Yes, I think I should start with a question about the continuity when there's a change of political leadership in municipalities. That is something that does not only occur at times at a municipal level, but also at your national and provincial government levels, especially when there's now a new political leadership coming in. But the transition in terms of, if I can call it, two different administrations shouldn't be to the extent that it impacts on service delivery, or that communities are affected in such a way that service delivery cannot take place. However, what we're unfortunately seeing, and we're seeing it also now with the coalition governments as well, remember our councils, they are the decision-making bodies and authorities within municipalities. And your administration are responsible for implementation. But if you have councils who cannot come to an agreement about certain issues and approve certain decisions or budgets, it unfortunately affects service delivery. But I also want to link that to the competency within municipalities, and perhaps this is also in response of the Constitutional Court decision in terms of the deployment of cadres within our structures of government and our organs of state, which I think is a very good decision. And we find that, and research also shows us that the labor component and the skills component of our officials within municipalities particularly, it has an impact on the quality of service delivery, where the services are delivered, as well as the viability and functionality of our municipalities and as well as our organs of state. So we can have a lot of good policies, and that is what our country is for. We can have our IDPs in place, but if we do not have the skill set and the right labor and competencies to implement whatever is in that 5-year plan, and as you have, for example, raised, the continuity and the sustainability of services to continue, that is also impacted by the extent to which do we have competent labor, or are people appointed into position because they belong to a specific political party. And we can come up with these grand plans and solutions, but if we do not address the issue of skills and people who are appointed in positions and are suitably qualified for those positions, we are not going to move ahead. And we will not be able to address the challenges that you have, for example, raised, ma'am, in Mangaung, for example. It is now, I think, the second time that Mangaung is placed under administration. So you start asking yourself as well, what happened to the plan that was put in place after they were placed under administration not so long ago? And there also seems to be a disjuncture there, because it doesn't only happen in Mangaung or in some municipalities here in the Free State. We have several municipalities in South Africa where Section 139 of the Constitution, for example, is invoked, and they are placed under administration, and an administrator is sent to that municipality to look at the challenges, whether it's the issues of governance or they are not meeting their legislative obligations or executive obligations. And then after the administrator leaves, unfortunately, things just digresses and goes back to where it started.
Thanks, Francis. I'm just quickly going to touch on 3 issues, and I'll keep it short. Maybe we can get in another round. First up, about cadre deployment. Notice that the Constitutional Court has not ruled on that. Arguments will only be heard in January, so no decision has been made by the Constitutional Court on cadre deployment. The different parties are now still preparing their court papers, and arguments will only be heard in January. So we don't have clarity on that. What we do know, so just some remarks about cadre deployment. One, that the political appointments in government and state positions rather is a feature of political life everywhere across the world. It happens in the United States, it happens in Europe, it happens in the Western Cape, contrary to what the DA might tell you. When a new government comes into office, they have the leeway to appoint their preferred choice of officials into certain positions. So that's stock standard across the world. The Zondo Commission, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, in his findings, did find, however, that cadre deployment, as practiced by the ANC, and as he has seen in his investigation into state capture over the last decade, has morphed into a practice where members of the ANC are deployed into almost all positions of state, and obviously government, but of state specifically, whether or not they have the skills to be able to fulfill that function, and for the express purpose of creating networks of extraction and patronage. So cadre deployment was a way in which the ANC, under Jacob Zuma, could tighten its hold over the state, for the purposes of repurposing the state to extract resources from the state. Good example is Eskom. Another good example is Transnet, where the cadre deployment committee over many years staffed Transnet's board and Eskom's board with pliable board members. They in turn appointed executives into senior positions at Eskom and Transnet, and those executives then proceeded to establish these networks of extraction, and we've seen billions of rand lost over the fiscus. So that's the problem with cadre deployment, and the Constitutional Court will rule on that in January. Massive problem, and it's obviously led to a loss of skills and in many instances, collapse of services. The second point I quickly want to address is whether or not South Africa is a failed state. South Africa is not a failed state. It's actually quite an interesting field of academic study. The London School of Economics regularly publishes a list of failed states and the criteria by which to judge a failed state. And quickly, they look at states that are in trouble according to 3 criteria. One is a distressed state where institutions are under pressure. I think we see that here, but the state is still able to support itself and still provides basic services. The second one is a crisis state, where those institutions that were under pressure starts failing, and where the state is unable to provide all basic services. And then you've got a failed state, where a country is unable to secure its borders, it's unable to, again, to provide basic services. But we certainly aren't there yet. And I think analysts should be very careful to label the country as a failed state, because once analysts with heft starts doing that, I think it does the country a disservice. So I think we should be very careful. We might be a distressed state. We might be a state that's moving towards a crisis state. But our state can still support itself. We have an independent judiciary still. We have functioning governments. We might be frustrated and angry about the levels of delivery, but they are still functional. We've had 5 general elections. I think none of them has ever been contested or questioned. So we've got a free electoral system. We've got a free media, which is an important marker for failed state status. And, as a journalist, I can write anything that I want. I won't be shot or sent to jail. So we're not a failed state. That's the second thing I want to address. And then the third thing, 600 political parties. I think the rich have already established their new party. Songezo Zibi, who is the former editor of Business Day, he was on the executive at ABSA. He's now started a movement called the Rivonia Circle. And the express purpose of his plan, and he will stand in the election, or his organization will, is to muster the black middle class specifically, that has grown by leaps and bounds over the last 20 years. But he is trying to monster and muster the black middle class into resisting the slide into poor governance that we're seeing now. So we are seeing that happening. We are seeing a change in the political environment. Action SA is a party that I think 18 months or 12 months ago did not exist. And in the previous municipal election, they took a number of wards off the ANC in Soweto, where the ANC used to get upwards of 95% of support. Now, that's a remarkable sea change, and we should acknowledge that. So the political environment is changing as well, and I welcome more political parties. I think we need to learn more about coalitions, and I think the collapse of the Johannesburg coalition, it will teach a lot of these parties how to give and take, how to be the lesser partner in a coalition. I've heard that, if Helen Zille walks into a room, everyone else walks out when these coalitions have their discussions. But people need to learn to work together. And I think it's going to be, these lessons need to be learned now, because in 2024, if the ANC, gets around 44, 45, 46, we can look at the EFF coming in all sorts of combinations, but it's going to be fascinating. And, as the citizenry, and you spoke about it, we expect our politicians to put our interests ahead of theirs and to put the interests of the community ahead of theirs. So let's hope they learn their lessons now and not in 2024, even after that.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Let's take a final round of about 3 questions. I want to go to this section because I don't think we had any questions. And there's also probably on the online. There's one question over there. Where's the mic? Do you have the mic there? Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Meiketi. I am a former student of this institution. I've got the first question to Dr. Biljon on who has failed on ensuring that the situation at local government changes. Because the AG has been issuing out reports and management letters to all these municipal councils, but there hasn't been any change that we can see. Otherwise, things are getting even worse. The second one, I think, can be shared by Dati Mbeki and Dati Mebek. What has stopped the situation that we had last year in July from coming to the level where the Arab Spring went? And then maybe the last one, why don't we as the country have leaders who learn from the models of Germany and the Asian tigers in trying to resuscitate the country and build it from scratch and build upwards, rather than putting it down the way it's going at the moment? Thank you.
Okay. Let's go to Lasha quickly, because that also gives an opportunity for the online.
Thank you. So the question is from Hazel Buloka, and she's asking, the youth is starting to give up. So I'd like to know how the youth can be kept engaged in the state problems.
Probably for you. Let's take I just want to check how many hands there are. Let's take 2, the last 2 there, because we need to wrap up at around 12. So take the last 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Mihlali Mkubasi. I would like to ask my question to Mr. Mbeki. If we look into the history of our struggle, we were assisted a lot by the most southern African countries. But recently we've been having, events such as your Operation Dudula, your Asian SA put South African first. What do you think might be putting us as a country that has been assisted mostly by the Southern African countries and other African countries when we are doing such attacks, or I may say xenophobic attacks to other, foreign people that we have in our country? Do you think, is it rebellious thing to our government, or do you think those attacks are those xenophobic attacks to our brothers and sisters in the African continent?
Last question.
Thank you. My question is to everyone. I heard that a lot was spoken about corruption, but I did not hear much about the private sector corruption. And we saw it from 2010 when it was the World Cup in South Africa, and then it was called collusion. And we all know that it was the partnership between the government officials and partnership between government, private sector also. So we saw it happening then, and we still see it in our own Mangaung metro municipalities, whereby there's no water, they don't supply water, they don't fix, they don't maintain, so that they can also use their own trucks to get tenders, and they use their own water tanks. And also we can also say that the civil society is doing something to ensure that they pick up their own trash every week. But we also have seen that some of the trucks, they are not for government, they are also part of the private sector. Now our people, our government officials have looted so much that now they are tending to become the private sector. And even though they are out, we're talking about continuation from one leadership in a municipality to another. And administration, they cannot go because now they get the tenders, and they already have signed the contracts of those tenders to continue giving those services for their own profit gains, even though they are not part of the government leadership anymore. But now, what is scary for me is that even we have seen it how government corruption has been talked about, but the private sector corruption is that it's only in the state capture that now we were aware about the Bosasa, how private sector also plays a huge role in ensuring that they collude with the officials, and then we end up where we are. And even though it has been said that the government must pull the private sector in, but then where is the private sector going to account? Because we know that as civil society, with votes, we can make the government official account and take them out of government. Now, I would like to find out from the panel that where does the private sector account, and what is going to happen when we see that Jesus is not coming, and definitely the hawks are not coming, because the hawks are now our Jesus. We are waiting so much for personal audit to happen, but hawks are not coming also. So now we don't know who's going to make who account.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Peter, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to end up with Moletsi. But I just wanted to add a question from my side, because I did say right in the beginning, I often ask the panelists, if you have to give a challenge to the university in the context of this debate, if you also can respond to that as you respond to the other question.
Absolutely, and I've thought about Francis. Let me start with your question, ma'am. Look, the private sector is as much, so let me answer in two parts. The state capture corruption, as we've seen it explained and investigated in the Zondo Commission and the Zondo reports, was on a grand and a massive scale. The loss to the fiscus and the loss of taxpayers' money over the better part of a decade is enormous. Billions and billions of rand has been lost due to these extraction networks established by individuals linked to the Zuma ANC and in turn linked to the Guptas. So that was corruption and extraction on an industrial scale. But for almost every part or every single incident of corruption, there was a private sector partner as well. And you mentioned Bosasa, and that's a famous one. But this week, I think it was yesterday or the day before, two of the world's biggest consultancy companies, McKinsey and Bain, were indicted by the National Prosecuting Authority, which means their officials will be charged with corruption and racketeering and fraud in this country. Bain, which is a US-based consultancy, which helped the Guptas spirit millions of rands from Eskom, and in fact help Tom Moyane re-engineer the South African Revenue Service to such an extent and to such a degree that it almost collapsed, have been barred from doing business with the state for the next decade, and many private companies have now stopped working with them. The same with McKinsey. I can go on. There are a number of private sector companies that have been identified in the Zondo Commission's report. I work for News 24. We write about all of them. Steinhoff is not linked to state capture, but that's a massive racket, and massive fraud was perpetrated on many people. So the private sector is as part of this as the public sector is. And I think as a journalist and as the media, we've worked extremely hard to expose private sector corruption and their role in enabling state capture. Then the National Prosecuting Authority has worked extremely, one of the big successes of state capture was the manner in which crucial state institutions were gutted by the Zuma government. The National Prosecuting Authority was one of these. And when Shamila Batoy was appointed National Director of Public Prosecutions in 2020, I think it was 2019, 2020, she had to pretty much rebuild that organization from the ground up. And what we're now starting to see in collaboration with the Hawks is that we are seeing some of these major state capture kingpins and private sector role players being brought to court. Only recently we saw Brian Molefe, Anoush Singh, and a couple of others appearing in court. In your city, in Bloemfontein, Ace Magashule, who is the suspended Secretary General of the ANC, is going to stand trial for corruption. And I know for a fact that the NPA would not have taken those cases to court if they weren't sure that they would be able to win that. So progress is being made. It's very slow. And the challenge that we've got, or the frustration that I think many people have, is that the wheels of justice turn very slowly. And it turns slowly because the system was corrupted for the better part of a decade. It's very easy to break down an institution, but to rebuild it, to make sure that the system starts functioning again, takes almost double the amount of time than it took to break it down. So it is going to take time, and I get the frustration with Centlec and the municipality, but there are good people working very hard. You mentioned the Auditor General earlier. I mean, she's a very efficient and dedicated public servant, trying to bring the problems that we've got at all levels of government to the fore. And I think it's very easy when you work with these things at the coalface to lose faith. But we've got some fantastic individuals working very hard to ensure justice and fairness. So that's just the two things that I like to talk about. Francis, a challenge to universities. One, keep on challenging the status quo. Keep on being critical of society and asking the difficult questions. And then the most important thing I personally think is guard your academic independence and guard your independence as a place of free thought where ideas can be tested jealously, because the moment we lose critical universities who are critical about society, universities who kowtow to the government of the day, or maybe ideas of the day, then we're all the poorer for it. So the challenge I would put to a university is to guard your academic independence and everything that comes with it fiercely and jealously and with a single-mindedness, because if we lose this spaces that universities create, then I think we're on this. Then we're on the road to a failed state. Universities are critically important for intellectual development and for developing thoughts and ideas. So guard academic independence fiercely.
Okay. I can just tell you that our sanity hasn't been captured yet, so.
Please prevent that.
Marie?
So the question about who is responsible or who has failed when the Auditor General provides a report in terms of the status of a municipality, whether it's the finances, service delivery, governance issues, and when those recommendations of the Auditor General is not being implemented, the question was then who has actually failed? So to respond to that question, you have to keep in mind that a municipality has a municipal manager who's then the accounting officer. And in terms of ensuring that whichever recommendations are made by the AG, there's a responsibility in terms of the competencies of the municipal manager and as the accounting officer to ensure that those particular aspects of the AG's report is then implemented. But unfortunately, what we do see is that that does not always happen. I know that there has now recently been legislation introduced where I think, and the rest of the panel can also correct me if I'm wrong, that the municipal manager can actually be kept accountable in terms of if those recommendations, if it has legal implications, are not being personally accountable. Thank you, Peter. So that is what actually should happen in reality. I think we must also ask ourselves and think about the role of our national and our provincial government in terms of how are they playing not only a supportive role, because if we look at terms of intergovernmental relations, national and provincial government is not only there to keep municipalities account or to play a support role, but also to exert some form of accountability. And as the legislation outlines where they invoke certain sections of the legislation, when municipalities are not performing as they should, I think there's also a role for our national and our provincial spheres of government to play a more proactive role and a better role in terms of ensuring that issues that are raised, especially by your Chapter 9 institutions and by the AG, that those issues are actually being implemented by municipalities in terms of the reports. I think, Professor, we have a big role to play in terms of how do we challenge the institution, the academics, our researchers, but also our students. And we have to make sure that our curriculum trains our students, especially students who are going to pursue a career in the public sector, that they are critical thinkers. And as Peter has stated, that they don't accept the narrative as it is and the status quo as it is, but how we are training them, that they must be transformative in their thinking and that they should challenge the status quo in terms of how do we change the narrative. And as I would say, for a student who's doing our admin degree or one of our postgraduate qualifications and who wants to go and work for the public sector or the public service in South Africa, do not pursue such a career if you are not concerned about the well-being of the communities. And I think to some extent we have lost that in the current dispensation. But I would say for us, in terms of our curriculum, let's start there and let's grow the minds of our graduates and see how we incorporate that also in terms of our curriculum and the graduate attributes that we are imparting in our graduates who will end up in the public sector. Let us continue through the research that we are producing also to challenge the narrative, the status quo, and also try and look at pragmatic solutions for our state of governance in the country. Because what we do not want is research that is only going to sit on a shelf somewhere. But how do we use that research to influence policy and to influence the decisions of our government?
Thank you, Maeve. Moletsi?
Yeah, can I start also with the university issue? I think the universities are very important, and that's why the society spends billions and billions on higher education. When you have a dynamic country like South Africa, and South Africa is a very dynamic society, we talk about our problems, but we forget that we have an incredibly dynamic society. If you look at the new social classes that are emerging in South Africa in the last 20, 30 years, for example, the emergence of the black middle class, what are the consequences of that? Where is the research about this particular class? So we have the universities. The universities should be telling us, the citizens of South Africa, Is this class playing a positive role? Is it playing a negative role? Is our money worth it that we are spending on it? And so on and so forth. So the universities are very, very important. Their research, I agree, is critical for us because our environment and the environment of the world is changing. So we need the research that the universities produce. But the universities and the public media, the mass media, Peter's mass media, have to learn to work together. This is one of the big problems we have in South Africa. Universities are not working with the mass media. I worked for Zimbabwe newspapers in the 1980s, and we tried every PhD that was accepted, we tried to report on it at the newspapers. It may just be a 1-inch article saying that this was a PhD that was accepted at the University of Zimbabwe. This is what it is about. In fact, I was told a couple of years ago, one of the articles that is still most remembered about my career in Zimbabwe newspapers, which was a 10-year career, was an article that I wrote about the role of livestock. This was a PhD. It was a PhD thesis on the role of livestock in the economy of Zimbabwe. So I used to edit the color magazine of the Sunday paper. So I worked with the author of the study of the guy who did the PhD, and we did a double-page spread about his findings, what he found about, and he was telling me that people are still talking to him about I haven't lived in Zimbabwe since 1990, but people are still talking to him about that article. So what we need in South Africa, we have our media like News 24 have to tell us when PhDs are accepted, they should write a short article saying, University of the Free State, there was a PhD on XYZ, this was accepted, this is what the examining board said about it, and then this is what the student who wrote, that's the relevance for the country. So we have to really establish this to make it into a permanent part of our mass media and the relationship between the mass media. Because then us in the private sector then have access to this knowledge that the research, maybe I can make a business with the author of this and see how we develop a business together. And that's how we create jobs at the end of the day. Now coming to the Operation Dudula and its activities. This is a very involved problem. It's one of the failures of the ANC government, how to manage relations with our neighbors. In the early 20s, ZANU-PF, the people of Zimbabwe voted against ZANU-PF. And ZANU-PF, instead of accepting what the electorate said, started fighting against the electorate. The South African ANC government collaborated with ZANU-PF in its fight against the voters. That is really what happened. And we can go through the evidence of all that. But that's what effectively happened. And one of the things that the ANC feared why it collaborated with ZANU-PF was because MDC, the Movement for Democratic Change, the new opposition party to ZANU-PF, was set up by the trade unions and by small and medium-sized companies like commercial farmers. the ANC was afraid that COSATU was going to emulate what the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union had done, because COSATU was extremely unhappy about an ANC policy called GEAR. And so the ANC did not want a trade union-led government on the borders of South Africa. So it collaborated with Mugabe and ZANU-PF to suppress democracy in Zimbabwe, so that the trade unions in South Africa did not do the same thing as the trade unions in Zimbabwe had done. And one of the ways in which it did is it turned a blind eye to corruption within the Home Affairs, and it also turned a blind eye to the people who were being victimized by ZANU-PF running into South Africa. It lifted the proper controls, which is why it introduced, for example, the now controversial Zimbabwe exemption permits. It was more to protect the ZANU-PF regime by keeping this, especially because many of them were young people, allowing them to run to South Africa. So South Africa became a safety valve to protect the ZANU-PF regime. That's point number one. Point number two, a few years ago, the London School of Economics published a report that Frelimo is importing heroin from South Asia, on-selling it to South Africa, and then on-selling it to North America and to Western Europe. Now, this report was a public report published by the London School of the Economics. What did the South African government do about it? Nothing. The government that actually took action on that report was the United States government. The United States government came to South Africa, their drug administration, and entrapped the people who were on selling heroin from Mozambique to South Africa and on to the United States. And they arrested the kingpin of that process, who was deported from South Africa and stood trial in New York and was sentenced in the United States. This report from London School of Economics listed the names of the people who were running the heroin trade from Afghanistan, from Pakistan into South Africa. South Africa has never asked that these people be deported to come and stand trial in South Africa. It just it turns a blind eye to that. So what you are saying is now the citizens in our townships whose children are the victims of this heroin trade, they are taking action against, random action obviously, against foreign people because the government is turning a blind eye to controlling the activities of the likes of Frelimo. In fact, irony of ironies, we have an army in Mozambique defending the Frelimo regime, which is killing young people in South Africa with the export of heroin. We are defending the Frelimo regime. Now, what kind of nonsense is that? So finally, on the issue of corruption, one of the major drivers of corruption in South Africa is black economic empowerment. And this is a very, very important so-called elephant in the room that we are not prepared to talk about. Why is black economic empowerment a driver? Black economic empowerment enriches ANC politicians. And that's where they get these preferential tenders in municipalities. They use their relatives, their cronies, and all the rest of it. That's what one of the major drivers of of corruption in this country is black economic empowerment. And who are the beneficiaries. Our president is one of the premier beneficiaries of black economic empowerment. And he has said repeatedly, black economic empowerment is here to stay, it's not going anywhere. But if you don't get rid of black economic empowerment, you can't get rid of corruption in South Africa, because it's a primary driver of corruption in this country. So that's one of the things, the research that I would like the University of the Free State to look into, black economic empowerment, who benefits from it and who is harmed by it. Thank you.
Okay. I think, well, let's see, that's probably a debate for another time. That's you know, we could, with this sort of topic and the quality of our panelists, we can probably go on for another hour or two, and I presume there would have been other questions that would come out. But we need to stop, and it seems to me that some of the issues that came out is obviously the question about political leadership. The fact that we agree that from the panel side that there is weak political leadership. I wouldn't necessarily say there is an absence of political leadership, but that is supported by an optimistic and also a semi-optimistic view coming from our panelists. We unpacked the economy and indicated that we have got all the solutions to fix the economy. And again, here is where the interconnectedness with the political leadership comes in, but also that there is a very positive outcry response from the private sector, specifically in areas of the resources part of the private sector, and hopefully, if we can get that right, that there is definitely positive signs in the economy. The third point that I pick up from the panelists is the fact that we've got a very, very strong civil society and also very, very strong communities. And to what extent do we infuse a co-created partnership with specifically local government, but that also could be other parts of government, the national government and provincial governments. And that is something that we need to crack in a way, because I believe that a lot of the future of South Africa is going to be happening there, and we need to look at that. And then the message for universities is clear, that we need to perform our jobs as intellectuals, as critical thinkers, both in terms of the research that we are doing, the type of graduate attributes that we want to transfer to our graduates leaving the institutions, but that we also should continue to allow spaces like this, safe spaces for critical debate. If you disagree, you can have the opportunity to disagree, and you're not going to be closed down. As Peter said, you know, you're not going to be sent to jail, but that we also challenge our curricula at our institution. Now, in terms of our research on black economic empowerment, Moletsi, I'm going to leave that out there for our academia to decide on. Marieve, coming from the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, we also cultivate a large degree of interdisciplinarity between the different faculties, and that might be a good project to focus on. But members from the audience here and on online, I think you would agree with me that the panel, Moletsi Mbeki, Peter de Tooy, and Marieve Billion, have done fantastically well to give us a much more closer insight again, going back to the questions that we often ask as citizens of a city, of a province, and of a country, give us a little different perspective, and I think we should give them a very good hand of applause. Thank you very much. And again, Thank you, Moletsi, Marieve, and Peter, for your contribution. Well done. Thank you. And thank you to the audience here and also online. Thank you very much.